Okay, that's good. Just see Magda's message. Oh, hello, Julie. Can you hear okay? Right. Hoping that's a yes. Thanks, Magda. No, I can't hear you. But if you can hear me, we'll use the chat box. Hello, Kenese. Hi, Chris. Stella, I can see that you're typing something. That's all right. Are you okay for me? Are you okay for me to start?
Oh yeah, I just wanted to let you know that I've been on a previous one, but I only went to the first one, so I hope it's okay for me to come on this one because I never finished the other one.
It's fine. I mean, this is the first one again,
Yeah.
but as it was quite a while ago, you know, as long as you don't find it too repetitive, it's not an issue for us.
I think I'll benefit from it. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So welcome everybody. My name is Sally Death. I'm going to introduce myself in a moment, and then I'm going to ask each of you to do that, but in the chat box, making sure that it goes to everyone so that we can all see. And then we're going to look at some of the key issues for funders and what concerns them and why, and start looking at some key questions in funding applications, but we will return to that next week, and some common reasons why applications can be turned down. So that's me. I'm freelance, but I do some tutoring for the Tinder Foundation on these courses and on the community development course, as Stella knows. And also we're going to be doing some short courses on teaching skills starting next month. But they asked me to do these sessions in particular because, as it says there, for 20 years, most of my work was as a funding advisor and tutor on funding courses with a charity called Fit for Funding. So could you introduce yourselves in the chat box? The group, we know your name, that will come up automatically, but the group you're involved with, what it does, and where it is in the country if that's not obvious from the name. Hi, Kenese. You're a community organiser. Yes, we have had some people doing that role on these courses before. And you're in Birmingham. Thank you. And Sam. Right, Milton Keynes College. And Cleon is digital inclusion with Sentinel Housing Association. Yeah, and Amy, ooh, you're getting ahead of me now. Amy, similar role, but Northamptonshire. And your colleague is here too, Kelly. So yeah, on the list. And Mark in Exeter, training people in getting back into employment, and also mental health focus. And Julie and Anita, also from St Paul's. Same as Kenese, yeah. And just scrolling down. Stella's in Milton Keynes at a children's centre. Do you know Sam?
I do, yes, yeah.
Right. Oh, I thought we got some useful networking, but never mind. Carla's in Workington, and again working with long-term unemployed people. Bear with me because I'm making a few brief notes because it's useful for me to remember who's what and where. And Susan, back to work support, ESOL, welfare benefits, etc. Right. Sorry to hear that, Julie. I don't have anything to suggest, I'm afraid. Let's hope you can get back on. You are still on. Magda's at Sentinel as well with Cleon. Got that. Chris, did I miss you? Very easy to do when I'm scrolling. Oh, yeah. So, TCV as in Carla. Right. Lovely. Thank you for that. And Ruth. I got down to Ruth. Library Services, North Yorkshire County Council. Yeah. So, a strong emphasis all the way through on digital inclusion and employability, but some quite significant variations as well, which is useful. Oh, now is that everybody who's on? Hard to say because some people aren't as numbers but not names, but we can catch up if we need to. So, I've got another question for you now. And again, because of the size of the group, I'll ask you to use the chat box. And what I want you to do is to think about yourselves as funders. Because if you donate your time or money, or even just choose where to give your second-hand clothes, you are making a decision to support one cause over another. So what I'd like to know is what motivates you to do that, or if you prefer the negative of that, what would stop you from giving to something? Right, so Kenese said it would be humanitarian reasons would be the main motive. And Carla, not if it's not being well spent or not well thought through. So there might not be any deliberate misuse of funds, but it might not be a very effective use of the money. Amy, if it was the organisation giving, then it would be about the corporate objectives. Oops. It's moving ahead of me again. Which are employability, back to earth, and health and well-being. Mark, the more individual version of that common goals and values, and a need. And Sam, that it's been spent wisely. Stella, yeah, you could lose faith in an organisation, or they changed what they were doing so it was no longer what you originally wanted to support. Now Ruth is talking about the targets for that organisation. I want to talk about demand later on. Susan, personal connections and experiences are a very strong motive for people. Health charities spring to mind in this regard, but not only. And also that issue of convenience or ease of being able to give. And things like text giving have been very helpful with that, haven't they? For the big national charities particularly. But if it's difficult to give, then that's off-putting, isn't it? And Cleon, speaking on behalf of Magda too, you say if you think differently, Magda. If it will make a difference, yeah. Solve a problem or create an opportunity, but not if there was no need, which is the point that Mark made earlier. It's true, Ruth, where there are scarce resources, funding can be lost or difficult to get. Chris, no waste, yeah, absolutely. And Kenese, if there's no visible results or impact, then you'd stop giving. Yeah. Good. Does that cover it for people? That's a good range there. And it fits well with the issues that more formal funders have, the ones that you might apply to. Because they are also concerned about, is the bid for something important to us and does it fit our priorities? So that is the organisational version of Susan's personal priorities and also fits with Amy's corporate objectives. Will it make a difference? Several people said this. Cleon, for instance. And is it going to meet a need, which also fits with the points that Mark and Kenese made? Are there going to be results and impacts? Is it likely to work, or is it badly thought through? Is a major issue for them, and something that Carla raised. Is it good value for money? I guess is closest to Chris's, is there no waste? One that you didn't say, but could have as individuals, is can we afford it? Some people will give if they've just been paid and not if they're nearly at the end of the payment period. Or they'll give if it's a small amount but a large ask is quite off-putting to them. And the same thing, of course, can apply with formal funders who have limited budgets. And also, is there any risk of fraud? Which I suppose could relate to Stella's losing faith in an organisation and Carla the need for the money to be well spent. And fraud is rare in the voluntary and community sectors, but it does happen occasionally, and when it does, it's very high profile. So funders are very conscious of it. So those issues tend to inform the information that they ask you for. So is it important to the funder? Well, you can tell that if they publish their priorities and or funding guidelines. They don't invariably do that, but most of them do. And one big problem for them is that too many applicants don't read the guidance because they're very busy. They just look at the application form, and the guidance actually gives a lot more information on the priorities and why they need the information they're asking for, which helps you to provide it and answer the questions. If you ask them to support anything outside their own priorities, you're highly unlikely to be successful unless they're a very informal funder and you know them well. And by informal, I mean individuals and some company funds. And you need to make an explicit connection between their interests and what you want them to fund, rather than assuming that it's obvious. Will it make a difference? To what? So what's the problem or the opportunity that you're looking to create? How do you know there's a need, that it is a problem? And what changes will you see for the people who need it, if you can go ahead with this piece of work? And how will you know those changes have been achieved? Evidencing need and defining outcomes and showing that the project is likely to lead to those outcomes are two key areas where applications often fall down. So I'm going to focus on those later today. So, how do you know that what you want funding for is needed? And I've said on the slide there, you might know that people want it, which is important. If they don't want it, you might not be giving them something that's a priority for them, and they might not take it up in sufficient numbers. But that is demand. So in addition to evidence of demand, what evidence of need do you have? And if your project is really your core work, you don't need to type that again because we know what that is. But if it's something specific, it will be interesting to know. So Magda, you could use census information on deprivation, and there may well be more recent information than the census, because of course that's only 10 years, but there's a lot of information collected which is available through the local observatories, for instance, and joint strategic needs analysis. And another one is the services that are available to people. So there's the deprivation affecting people, particularly if there's any economic focus to your project. But there's also what else is provided and where the gaps are. Cleon, if you know that a certain number of people are not connected, and any analysis of digital skills and particularly skills gaps, yeah. Right, so Sam's project is a holistic one to overcome barriers to improving people's lives. So you could actually do all sorts of things in pursuit of that aim, couldn't you? In Chris's case, it's youth unemployment statistics. Yeah. Absolutely, Kenese. Right. If you're a community organiser, then the projects need to be, to a large extent, dictated by what local residents actually want to do. And this can present certain challenges to people trying to put in funding bids because the detail, to an extent, is missing. But as we'll see when we come to outcomes, I think one solution to that is focus more on what you want to achieve rather than the means by which you plan to achieve it, which you want to agree with local residents. But there's still the case of the need to demonstrate. So what you might be looking for in your context is evidence that in a particular area people are not very connected, not very empowered, that they are at a disadvantage in terms of coming together to do this for themselves. And I know the company, the Community Organisers Company, has some central data that you can draw on. Right, Stella, if you're looking at income generation, that is a different route, isn't it? That's usually through trading, in which case you don't have to demonstrate the need for what you want to do. You have to identify a product and a market. But you will be very interested in demand for that product. It doesn't matter whether people need it, it's whether they want it and can and will pay for it. I can see Kenese is coming back to me, or was. Well, I'm going to put my view of different ways to evidence need. Yes, there could be secondary research. If other people have researched a community, you don't do that community favours by over-researching it unless the research is outdated. So if there's something already available, you can draw on that. It may be that there's something in the local strategy that confirms the importance of what you want to do. So the categories that I've got there do fit with the points that you've each been making, because there may be statistical evidence, such as youth unemployment. There may be other people's research or strategies that identify this as a priority. There may also be pressure on existing services. If there's a waiting list for your service, that does show there's a demand for it, but it also shows very simply that the existing service can't cope, can't meet the demand. And mapping the services available and identifying gaps or niches. That has the added advantage that it shows that you are aware of the context you're working in and you're trying to work in partnership with other agencies. But you've still identified a niche that you can fill that isn't currently being filled. So the following question is about the changes you expect to see as a result of doing this work. How will your project improve people's lives? And are you clear about how you could actually capture those improvements? You can say no. Oh. Okay. So, yes, I take your point, Ruth, that where people go after they've been with you is hard to predict. There are lots of different directions they can go in. But I think what you can say is that basic computer skills open the door to so much, don't they? Almost turning it round and saying, without this intervention, people are excluded, marginalised, impoverished as well, because so many things are cheaper online. And what we aim to do is equip them with the skills that allow them to go off and do all these different things. And what they do with it is going to vary, and you won't always get feedback from them. It's hard to track them over time. They don't always stay in touch. But you know that at least by the end of however long your courses are, they will have confidence in their basic skills. They will have gained certain specific skills that will then enable them to do this. In some ways, there are some parallels, I think, with Kanise's point with the community organising. You want people to choose their own direction. Now, Magda saying with debt advice, yes, you can actually look at the improvement in people's financial situation as the result of the debt advice. That's quite easily quantifiable, isn't it? And usually you do know in individual cases. But you might also be measuring how resilient people are for the future to avoid getting into debt again if they have greater awareness of budgeting issues or which bills to pay first, how to avoid accruing a lot of interest owed. So that improves people's lives over the longer term, as well as reducing the debt in the short term. Yeah, in Chris's work, it's young people not in education, employment or training. So the immediate thing you'll be measuring is the training and hopefully progress into employment, although depending on the job market where you are, it may be quite variable how successful they are. But you are at least improving their employability, aren't you? Cleon, the number of people actually getting online, that's a good measure in itself, isn't it? Qualifications attained are a straightforward measure of skills and knowledge gained where people are actually taking externally accredited courses. Regular internet use is a good thing, isn't it? So they're changed habits. And also you're talking about the savings, the financial savings that accrue that I mentioned before. Yeah. In Sam's case, it's improved health and well-being, and to some extent, you're taking the view of the individual, and particularly with mental well-being, their perception may be the best measure there is. Although there are others, if you're thinking of things like exercise, then you can look at Wii Fit scores and things like that. Or it might be with mental health if they're heavily dependent on antidepressants, say, and they manage to reduce that use with their GP's agreement, then that's quite a good quantitative measure of people's improvement, but also employment qualifications and sustained employment. Yeah, it's not just getting into jobs, it's staying there and the quality of the jobs and progression. That requires you to attract people for quite a long time, doesn't it? And Carla also looking at employment, better lifestyle and focus. Hi Susan, welcome back. You can see from the slide what we're just talking about, can't you? Yeah, that's an interesting one, Carla, isn't it? The better focus. So again, it might be that resilience and those very transferable life skills that have improved for people. For some people, there's a phrase that used to be used in the field I used to work in, which was working with homeless people and people with housing needs. And there was talk of meaningful use of time, that if people had drifted for quite a long time, then just more of a routine might be a very significant change for them. So it can be very person-centered, but you're looking at some kind of positive change for people that you can capture. Anybody concerned about how to capture these changes? I know Cleon is typing. Or if anybody wants to put a hand up, we can try speaking. And Amy is too. While you're doing that, I'm just going to put my next slide up, which is some examples of changes that are measurable. So we've already said that feedback from the target group is a key one, and in some things, those people are the experts, aren't they? If you're looking at increased confidence, then they know whether they feel more confident. But you might want to supplement that with other evidence, such as your own observations. You see people able to stand up and speak in a group when they really couldn't when you first met them. Or there might be witness statements from third parties that confirm things like that. You wouldn't want to rely entirely on your own observations because it's not objective enough, but in conjunction with other evidence, it can be fine. And then there are the more quantifiable things like you mentioned qualifications achieved, drop address size, assuming that's what people are aiming to do, or increased levels of use, and we've mentioned that in terms of more internet use. I think it was Cleon that said that earlier, or increased levels of interaction, and that could be between different sections of a community that aren't very well integrated, or just more social interaction, full stop, if people were quite isolated before. And I'm thinking of Kenise and Julie and Anita, that is something that I think is quite relevant to community organising. Cleon, did you have a point? Oh, yeah, right. So there was another one before of the changes. Here we are. Yeah. So Mark was talking about the evidence for holistic approaches. Hard to find the evidence to back up your success or previous successes that it's effective, because I would have thought there would be research out there, although I couldn't point you to anything specific of the value of art therapies. But apart from anything else, it's not stigmatized, is it? Art. And creativity is a great way into things for people. Stella looking at a healthy lifestyle group. Yeah, it's interesting with health and well-being because a lot of specific health funding is looking for concrete evidence of health gain, which means it's not always suitable for projects where the people coming don't necessarily think of it as health. They might think of it as more interesting activities. But if they do recognise they have a health issue, then yes, health improvement and mobility improvement would be a great measure, wouldn't it? Now, Amy's saying they struggle to achieve their longer-term achieved outcomes, and this is on digital inclusion. So is that thinking back to the earlier point that sometimes then people, I think it was Ruth's, people go off and do all sorts of things and you never hear from them again. As Magda's point about people getting voluntary work, I think is a very good one. And it may be more achievable than paid work. Yes, Kenise, in your context, it's a matter of setting your own indicators, which is good because you don't want to be constrained by other people, and work out what outcomes are going to show that you're on track towards the ultimate goal without having very restrictive targets, which is why I'm suggesting things like levels of interaction or activity or even activism may be more relevant. So how do you measure future resilience, Amy? The example I was using in relation to debt advice would be people having stronger budgeting skills so that they are less vulnerable to debt. But it depends on resilience to what, doesn't it? It might be as much about having social support networks strengthened. So depending on how you're working with people, If it's a holistic approach, for instance, then part of it might be helping people get back in touch with their families if those are their personal objectives, which in turn gives them more informal support and makes them more resilient. You wouldn't want targets around that, because it might be you don't get anybody in that position. But if you say your aim is to increase people's resilience, and one of the measures is the number of social support forms they have available to them, I think it's well recognised that the broader the range of support forms you have, the more resilient you're likely to be. You might promote things like skill sharing in an area, so that people are aware of the resources available amongst their neighbours, and also made more aware of the resources they already have, because it's quite easy for people to underestimate those, isn't it? But it might also just be raising people's awareness of what help and advice is available to them. It depends where they start from, doesn't it? So I think the softer skills are very relevant, they're very transferable, and you can still measure them even though they won't lead to qualifications in most cases. But you can still ask people about their levels of knowledge and confidence. You can test them if need be. Name me 3 support services in your area, the beginning and the end of the project. Yes, I got that you are concerned. And yes, it's true, Kenese, if projects spin off, they're unpredictable. You can have unintended outcomes, but you want to capture them, even if it's just a description, because they are an important outcome from that project. Yeah, Chris, you could measure youth unemployment levels, but if you're only working with a small number of young people, and I don't know whether you are, the actual statistics might go up through no fault of yours. So you need to be a bit careful with that. The same applies to if you're trying to address crime in an area. There are so many external factors. You have to be careful of it. I think there's a bit of interference coming in. Would people mind muting themselves? I think that's stopped now, actually, so that's fine. But the qualifications gained will be specific to the young people you work with, won't they? So that's fine, that's safe. You know what I mean? But what you might also be doing, I don't know if you are, is working with employers to encourage them to take on young people. So if they change their approach or their policies or how they market job opportunities, then that will be worth capturing too, because that might be easing a path into employment for young people. So it's not always just working with the people directly in need. But it depends entirely on the job market in your area, and I don't know enough about it. Okay, let's move on looking at the time. Another big issue for funders was, is it likely to work? And the ways that they would check this would be, is there consultation to check that it's what people want, and at times and in places that they want? Have you planned the activity in detail, and does it all look workable, and does it match the budget? Does everything seem to have been included? And are the costings realistic? Do you have experience of doing similar work? If you don't, have you taken advice from someone who has? And then in relation to costings, there are some specific issues. For instance, if you want them to fund equipment or a building, how are they to be maintained in the longer term? have you actually included enough money for what you plan to do? Quite often people undercost, and that is quite a big issue. If they're successful, then they've got some money but not enough to do what they said they would do with it. If the funder spots it and says they're not realistic, then they won't be successful. So, conversely, is it overcosted and therefore looks wasteful or not good value for money? They're almost all oversubscribed, so they are looking for value for money. Individuals are quite often concerned about the proportion of their donation going on central admin costs as opposed to the front line. Formal funders tend to be a bit more understanding about how difficult it is to fund the front line without some central admin costs, but they're still concerned if it looks disproportionately high, the amount going into the core. So you need to be able to justify the one in relation to the other. And is the amount you're asking for reasonable for what you want to do and affordable for them? Is there any risk of fraud? I've said it's rare, but a lot of their procedures are dictated by the fear of it. So they're likely to want to see financial policies and procedures and accounts that have been audited or independently examined. They may ask for references or other checks from third parties. They may only fund organisations that are regulated in some way, for instance by the Charity Commission or Companies House. And they also check details such as, do all your documents have the same group name on? Because just as with fraudulent companies, if there's a dubious history of an organisation, it can close down and start up somewhere else under a different name, and that would cause alarm bells to ring. What this means in practice is that people that download documents, model documents from the internet and forget to put their own name on can come to grief. So they're just the kind of things that need checking. So, from the horse's mouth, as it were, some funders say, remember, we do want to give money away. That's what we're there for. But you have to help us. This is Alan Eagle, who works for what is now the Santander Fund, but used to be the Abbey Charitable Trust. And he says, in order to do that, we need applications that clearly meet our criteria and some clearly defined impact, what difference the donation will make, and evidence of a need. Resources available. We are living in times of austerity, but there are still some development workers out there who can advise on funding applications and sometimes read over them, the drafts. And the National Association of Voluntary and Community Action, NAVCA, has member organisations in most parts of the country, and if you go onto their website, there is actually a map that will show you your nearest one if you're not already in touch with them. Now, you could actually give me a green tick or a red cross, if you would, up on the menu at the top, where the green cross and the hands up sign are. Is it true or false that if you've consulted people about whether they want a service, that will provide enough evidence of need? Amy saying no, Cleon saying no, Canese is saying no, Mark saying yes, unless that's up from before. It is essential to check that people want a service, and that's your evidence of demand. But you do also need some further evidence that the rest of us would agree that it's needed. Because there's plenty of things with high demand. We'd all like to go on a really nice holiday paid for by somebody else. But it doesn't necessarily mean other people would agree that we need it and it justifies subsidy. So it's very important, but it's not enough on its own. Fraud is widespread in the voluntary sector. Are those crosses there from before? It's not widespread, but it does affect us all. Bids can be rejected if costings are too low.
2.
Who was that? Ian saying yes, Kanita saying yes, Mark saying yes. That's true, they can, because it looks as though it's not been properly planned. So you need to be accurate and able to back up the figures. And keep the workings, because if they ask you about it several months down the line and all you have is the budget, it can be quite hard to remember how you arrived at the figures. So what next? We have another webinar in a week's time, which will look at some other questions on funding applications. But the first part of it is a follow-up to the task that you need to do in between. And this is on Learn My Way. So if you're not already registered on Learn My Way, you need to reply to Alison's email about registering so that you can access the online task. There are actually 2 tasks. One is quite a quick multiple choice one, and we don't refer to that next week. The other one has sample applications to a fund, which we want you to assess, and you can download those. And I'm going to be asking people next week what they thought of them. There's a scoring system as well, and how they scored them. So it is important to do that task before attending webinar 2. And if you can't, you might want to consider booking on a later webinar 2, because we do have some further dates in. So the next time I'm doing the second webinar is on the 6th of June. Or if you wanted a Thursday, I'm doing it again on the 16th of June. And in order to access those, you do need to let Alison know your Learn My Way details. As I say, we'll also look at some other key questions on application. But if there are some specific ones that you want to discuss or that you find challenging, bring them along. And I'll keep a little bit of time at the end for looking at those. Okay, any questions? It's 7 minutes to 3, so you're entitled to 7 more minutes. But I imagine you're all busy people. I know there are a couple of people that had to join us partway through. If you want me just to scroll back to some of the earlier slides, I could do that. Cleon, sorry, he was saying, is 20% too high for overheads and admin? It depends entirely on the context, really. I prefer not to use a straight percentage, even though arithmetically that's the easiest thing to do. If your manager and admin worker support 5 frontline staff, then 20% seems an appropriate amount because it's going to be 20% of their time. But if they support 10 staff, then probably not. Thanks, Amy. Right. Yes, exactly, Ruth. You need to make sure Alison has your Learn My Way details. The recording will be available, yes, via Alison. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Stella. I don't know whether it's worth doing it twice, but at least you had input from different people in the group this time. Thanks, Kenny's. Thanks, Susan. Have a good week, everybody. Oops. Sorry, Julie. I think you sent me a message and I've lost it. Oh, right. It was about listening by phone, was it?
Yeah.
Right. I do apologise. This is a different version that we're using for these webinars, a different software from what we used last time we did these. And it's got various functions that I'm not used to, which one of them is that private messages are grouped together privately, and before I could see them all together. So I keep forgetting to look when a name comes up at the bottom. Anyway, you managed to hang in there, did you? Marie, are you okay? Because I think you missed a bit at the beginning. Yes, you will get the recording.